Hi, here's your Gen Talk on planning your empirical study, designing the recipe that is your research proposal. I'm Jennifer Kalfsbeek-Goetz, your instructor for ATHS 618 Research Design and Methods. Okay, let's start talking about what needs to go into that recipe. As you remember in my class, my focus always is on reminding you that you have to create enough detail in your research proposal that it can be treated like a recipe that someone else, completely unrelated to your topic, maybe who you've never talked to before, can pick it up, know the ingredients, know the amount of each ingredient, and know when and how to put your research study together. You have to provide all of those necessary details. I always say to my class, pretend that you win the lottery and it's enough to take off to a Pacific island, vacation forever in Tahiti, or buy an island yourself. You're gone. You've left your proposal behind. It's important. It's been funded. Someone's got to do it for you. So you can't leave it or write it in such a way that everything is up here and you know it, so no worries. You have to write it for someone who isn't in your head, and that's everyone except for you. And they won't have access to you because you're on that island and there's no cell coverage, and even if there is, you're not paying any attention to work anymore. So we're going to build that recipe, and a key element of that recipe is mapping out the plan. So things that you need to keep in mind are the necessary elements of your investigations plan. We talk about chapter 3, which is the research methods chapter of a proposal, and you will have to have informed consent, sometimes more than one informed consent form if you have more than one type of participant, or if you have minors or vulnerable adults, you also need to have their guardians or their parents. So you'd have informed consents for each type of participant there. Not just that, if you have a survey, you'll have to attach the survey because this person who's taken on your research has to be able to take it all on with all of the elements. If there are other pieces of items that you need someone to have, maybe in your study, there are images that participants need to look at, or audio files that they need to listen to, or documents that they need to read. Those are also attached as appendices, and you reference them in Chapter 3. So you need to think of all of the necessary elements of your study so that when you're done writing the proposal, everything is there, just like a recipe in a cookbook. You also need to specify a realistic timeline. As you're writing your proposals, you're thinking, okay, I'd want to get in there, get through this as quickly as I can, and look at the results because I'm so excited and interested in learning what the outcomes are. But it's rare that a study moves quickly, and you certainly want to plan for enough time for any contingencies that you might need to integrate. Something may take longer. You may not have access to the people that you'd hoped you would at the timing that you would. You don't have to factor in a lot of contingencies, but you should create a realistic timeline. This doesn't mean by specific date. Usually it's by weeks or by months. It could be in the first month of the study, we will determine our sampling method and do X, Y, and Z to identify the population. And then you talk through those elements by week or by month. And that will help you as you're thinking it through. Know, okay, it's going to take me a year or 6 months or 9 months or 6 weeks to complete the study from beginning to end, from the point in which you start data collection to data analysis and reporting. So you'll really need to have a specific timeline. Again, I'm not talking dates. You never know when your study will be approved, so don't say January 1st. Say in week 1 or in week 1 of the first month of the 6-month study, and then go through what those weeks or months are. And then the other really critical thing that you're going to have to think about is outlining and providing the resources that are needed, letting the research chefs or cooks who are going to take over your recipe know what people they will need. Will they need other people to assist with the research? Will they need to connect with agencies or other contacts in order to complete the research and meet the participants and gain access to them? Are you including financial remuneration to those who get involved, or gift cards or something like that? And are there other supplies that you might need? If there are audio files that they need to listen to, are you providing something that will play those audio files, and headphones or not? Is it pen and paper and you need to make sure that you've provided enough paper, staples, a copier, pens and pencils? If you're keeping things in paper, do you have the lockable file cabinets? Those kinds of things. You have to think through, when they do this thing that I am proposing, what are the steps that I will have to tell someone else they'll need to do? So in planning your recipe, steps and the ingredients, the timeline, budget, and resource preparation, of course, is critical. Chapter 3, as I've mentioned, is your research methods chapter. So you have the ingredients, and I've mentioned the reference list, or I've mentioned to reference the checklist. So Chapter 3's checklist focuses on these elements listed here: overview of the research methods, briefly link the theoretical framework from Chapter 2 to your design selection, your research design strategy, the type of research, underlying assumptions, and rationale. And in that section, you'll want to talk about your goals, your cycle, your approach, and the research methods types. All of those are from the overview document in our course. What's your sampling method? What are the measures that you're going to utilize? Also, what are the actual instruments and protocol documents needed to be described? Those will also be in the measures section in Chapter 3. What is your data collection? Include participation in qualitative studies as well as quantitative studies. If you're going to pilot test because you've created a new instrument, then explain that. You don't have to do pilot testing, but a lot of students in our program do create their own instruments because something that they're doing is relatively new, and so they decide to pilot. So explain what that pilot testing will look like first. Data analysis. You're going to have to explain your data analysis or your statistics that you're going to utilize, and how you're going to code your data if it's qualitative data. What are some limitations of the methodology and strategies that you've chosen, and how are you minimizing that impact? Pilot testing oftentimes is one of the ways that we minimize that impact. Triangulation can be one of those ways. Mixed methods can be one of those ways that you minimize the limitations in one part of your research or another. If you're doing a quasi-experiment because you couldn't do random assignment, you would explain that. Explaining limitations is not bad. It's not saying this is what's bad about my study. It's just saying we are losing an element of validity or the ability to draw a cause and effect relationship with certainty because of this element or that element. Other limitations would also be researcher bias. If you're going into a space that you know very well, or it's your own workplace, you of course already have preconceived notions and ideas. So you'd want to talk about those limitations and maybe some things that you're trying to do to minimize that impact. Maybe you're including another researcher who doesn't work there, who's going to assist you in data collection or in data analysis. Ethical considerations. We've talked about this a lot. This is absolutely critical. You must, in this section, talk about informed consent. And you need to talk about any possible harm, psychological or physical, that participants could experience. You need to make sure in this section you talk about the fact that participants can choose to quit at any time. And if you've promised them anything, they still get the thing that you've promised. So go back to our ethics conversations and make sure you've included all of the elements. It's absolutely critical. And then you need to include a timeline. And I sort of got into that on our previous slide. Be specific. I've had students create a table that fits a third of a page that just says, January 1st through January 15th, do data collection. January 16th through January 31st, survey participants. I'd like you to think of things rather than specific dates, but the number of weeks things will take, and break it all down to each of the elements that you have in your study. You have the sampling. How much time is that going to take? It may be even before you start doing your sampling methods that you have to hire participants, or you have to reach out to a company, an agency, an organization that's going to either provide you with your participants or connect you with those participants. So think through everything from pre-sampling and data collection to and through sampling and data collection, how long it will take you to do data collection. If you have a large sample size because your population size is large, you'll probably need more time. And of course, that will depend on what you're doing. If you're doing an online survey and just waiting for people to submit, that doesn't take as long as if you're doing interviews, focus groups, and a survey, or different things like that, or field work in an environment for a period of time, or a case study in a classroom for a semester. So you need to factor in all of those elements, and it doesn't have to be by date or even by week. It can be in month 1, I will complete, or the study will complete X, Y, and Z steps. Make sure you describe it in as much detail as possible. Usually the timeline takes about a page. It can be in table format or a narrative, might even take a page and a half depending on the types of methods that you're utilizing. Could be a little bit less than that. If you're doing mixed methods, you've got to really take into account all of the elements, and oftentimes with mixed methods, we want certain things to come before other things. Not always, but sometimes. So remember, you've won the lottery. Leave behind a plan that anyone can follow. That's your recipe. That is critical as you're writing your research proposals. Thank you.